This is it. In the mystery novels, this is called the parlor scene, where the clever detective reveals all. If this were a work of fiction, the author would pause the story here to ask the readers if they'd put together all the clues.
Oh, do get on with it, young man.
Sorry, sir, but in our secret hearts, every real cop longs for a moment like this, and damn few get one. Indulge me, please. Jack, will you ask our villain to join us now?
Anything you say, Buana. You've got her murderer here?
Yes, I suspected the killer couldn't resist attending our annual ball, and I had Jack circulate among the guests looking for her.
Her? Who? Do we have to do this?
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Rose Red's killer.
Created by Bill Willingham, Fables is an incredibly long-running comic. The mainline series alone ran for 150 issues, and that's not counting spin-offs, a revival, and an incredibly popular video game, The Wolf Among Us. Perhaps you've played it and you didn't even realize it was from this comic. But how did it all start? Let's explore that first volume, a murder mystery. Who killed Rose Red? As Bigby Wolf, Snow White, Cinderella, Bluebeard, Jack, and more come together to solve the mystery. If you like this video, please give me a like. You can support this channel over on patreon.com/diviningcomics. You can read my personal blog at spikestonehand.com. And you can subscribe to this channel so that you never miss a video. Join me in my Divining Comics Challenge where I read 52 comics across the whole year, and comment below with how your reading journey is going. Thank you for watching this video where I am joined by special guest Zach Dean of the My Marvelous Year and Extra Issues podcasts, which you should listen to. I will have links for those in the show notes. Without further ado, let's talk Fables.
Boys and girls, your attention, please. Presenting a new exciting radio program featuring the thrilling adventures of an amazing and incredible personality.
Hello and welcome to Divining Comics, a channel where I find the magic hidden between the panels of your favorite comics. My mild-mannered alter ego is Steven, but when I fight for justice, I go by the superhero alter ego Spike Stonehand. And today I have with me a guest, a longtime internet acquaintance and host of the My Marvelous Year and Extra Issues podcast. It's Zach Dean. Zach, do you have a superhero alter ego that you go by?
I do. When I fight for justice, I am Squish Softhand, and I'm very fragile. Thank you so much for having me, Spike.
Of course, glad for you to be here. I will say Squish Softhand does sound like a knockoff Ecstatics. One of the guys that dies in the first few issues of that.
100%. He's got the softest hands in the Marvel Universe.
Great for massages, not so great for fighting crime. But I have Zach on here today to discuss my pick for a Vertigo comic that I'm going to be reading in the 52 Comics Challenge that I've crafted. And I picked Fables. I had Zach on here because I'm led to believe that this is an important or influential comic in your comics reading journey, Zach. Could you tell us a little bit about...
Who told you that? Who's been spreading lies? No,
you have.
Yeah, it's me. Fables is one of my absolute favorite comics of all time, and I think partially because I think it's excellent, and partially because it was this and Preacher by Garth Ennis were my two big entries into there are comics besides like newspaper strip comics, Calvin and Hobbes, and superhero comics. These are the comics that got me to realize that there's a big world of comics out there, and they're doing all kinds of interesting things, and they can be a little more adult than what I grew up reading. And yeah, excited. Thank you. I'm glad to be here and to talk about this comic a little bit.
Could you talk a little bit about Fables? Is a comic that runs an incredibly long time, has so many different spin-offs, but I feel like it doesn't hit the discourse the same way a lot of like Preacher that you just mentioned or some of the other Vertigo comics from that same era. And I'm just wondering if you have any ideas to why something was so popular for a long time when it came out, and yet maybe doesn't seem to have that same lasting impact that some of the other comics did.
I have genuinely no idea, because the like this concept could be so hot in like it feels like IP that is so rich for mining in like television, basically, and I can't believe that like it has never gotten a really good prestige adaptation. I think potentially because ABC had that Fables series
That's what I was going
that
to say. Yeah.
maybe filled a similar niche, although that was a much less adult, kind of complex, dark series.
Yes,
I think
for
maybe
my
that
mom.
was
My
just
mom loved that series.
yeah,
I don't think she
yeah,
would
yeah.
like
It's
Fables.
it's very mom-core for sure. Fables went for 150 issues initially from 2003 to like 2015, something like that, and then just a couple years ago, Bill Willingham came back. I think in like 2023 to 2024, and weirdly did a dozen more issues of it. There's also many spin-offs, like there's a 60-issue Jack of Fables, like Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack the Giant Killer spin-off of it called Jack of Fables that I do not recommend.
Jack didn't seem like one of the more interesting characters in these issues, so I can imagine.
It's him
Yeah.
attempting a more pure comedy comic, and I never really thought it worked. But it's the only one of the spin-offs that I really don't think works, because you also have the spin-off of Fairest, which is a bunch of the female fables, which I think works pretty well, and Cinderella gets a few of her own series as like a super spy, which is quite fun.
We can talk a little bit about the writing, because these 5 issues that make up the first volume of Fables tell a very complete story. You could
Yeah.
hand this to somebody and they would be satisfied. There's not really any, other than I guess the nature of the adversary that has come in and kicked the Fables off of their ancestral homelands, forcing them to live in New York City undercover. Other than that, there isn't any ongoing hook that I think is kind of interesting. So I am a little bit curious as to, is there an ongoing month-to-month grab other than just you like these characters and you like the setting, or is
Oh,
there...
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's actually like a clever trick of the series, is that this first 5-issue arc stays really tightly focused on like, it's a cool concept, like that you have fairy tale fables living in New York City. They're like immortals hiding among us, and it's a murder mystery. Snow White's sister Rose Red has been killed. Bigby Wolf, the big bad wolf, is the detective. He's on the scene, and you are not getting big exposition. You're not learning what the homeland is. You're not learning about this wider war. You're not learning about factions, etc., except like just in a little titch at the end, the mayor gives a little speech that kind of explains a little bit more about the situation, but it really stays focused on like characters, and there's a murder mystery, and you're hooked on that, and seeing the kind of pleasure in seeing like the interpretation of how are Beauty and the Beast living in this modern setting. How are they adapting? The comic expands greatly and becomes much more, lots and lots of ongoing arcs. I mean, it's very television. It feels very prestige television influenced, where, you know, you've got your big, huge overarching plot for the whole series, and then you've got smaller seasonal arcs with lots of, you know, B, C, and D plots running throughout it. But I think Bill Willingham keeps a really tight focus on this one small story, so as not to say, hey, this is a fantasy epic, you're in for this big thing and you've got info dumps and exposition. He holds off on the exposition really wisely, so that when it comes, you're excited for it, because you're like, I know these characters and I know this setting and I'm invested. So when you do get that backstory, it, rather than it feeling like, okay, this is something to learn, you are like, you're champing at the bit to find out more about this world and these people. It's a nice slow trickle of things. I think it's really wisely doled out slowly.
That is interesting, because I know that at least one later kind of prestige creator-owned series in The Wicked and the Divine intentionally modeled their first arc a little bit after Fables, with the murder mystery hook to kind of give you into the broader high concept world. But I think that doesn't do what you're saying here of keeping it very narrowly focused. The first arc of The Wicked and the Divine does have a lot more ongoing mysteries. It was clearly trying to set up what became around a 50-issue run, and like you said, I really don't see that here. It was a very satisfying just to read on its own. I was engaged by the mystery. Bill Willingham in the writing did a really good job of kind of crafting that mystery of who killed Rose Red. It was a satisfying mini little arc, and I think that is interesting that there is that kind of bigger premise. I even think comparing it to other Vertigo series like Sandman or Lucifer that I've read, even Preacher, right? Preacher begins with he's gonna
Preacher
kill God, you know. And
Yeah,
that's the whole
yeah,
series. It doesn't you get little way stations on that bigger journey, but you know from the first issue this is where it's going. And yeah, I really like the way that it did that tight narrative here of the murder mystery.
And it continues this with, so we get hints of the human-looking Fables are free to live in New York City openly, but the non-humans, like we see the three little pigs, can't be out in public, right? Beast from Beauty and the Beast, he needs a charm to make himself look human, or he's not allowed to live in New York City. They have a farm, they call it, right? You hear Snow White talk about this in the early... And like the next arc is about discontent on the farm, and then you get an arc about people running for mayor, and it's really like he takes a full 2 years before he really starts to do anything more than just like hint at this larger story. So you are really fully invested in like the smaller, I mean, I'm gonna say smaller, but there's still like violence and drama and character stuff, but there's, you know, the larger story that you think of that gets concluded in this doesn't even really kick in for like a full 2 years, and he keeps a tight focus on, let's learn who these people are, let's tell stories with them. He loves to do background issues with just like, here's a tale of, you know, Jack of Fables,
Right.
traveling in the American South 300 years ago, stuff like that. So I think it's a really clever way to do it, but it also shows that Willingham, it's Buckingham and Willingham. Bill Willingham is the writer.
Yeah.
Mark Buckingham is not in this first arc, and then after this first arc, he takes over the pencils and more or less is the penciler for the vast majority of the series. So he really is. It's a little like Walking Dead. The very first arc of Walking Dead is a different artist, and then it's really known for the second artist.
Right. Yeah, I was confused by that because I had known that Mark Buckingham, who I mostly also otherwise know for he did some of the Miracle Man continuations with Neil Gaiman before all of the Neil Gaiman stuff went down. I was surprised that it wasn't Mark Buckingham on this art,
Yeah,
but
it's
I wasn't disappointed. I did like a lot of the. It's very Vertigo
Lan
house style.
Medina is, yeah. Well, Lan Medina, I think, is excellent. Really expressive faces, really detailed expressions on their face. But like, man, the guy is horny. There's a very clear horniness to the way he draws people. But it's not gender exclusive. It's not just the women. Like Prince Charming is very beautiful in these comics. So he does extend that, to both genders. But surprisingly, it doesn't feel like a harsh transition to Mark Buckingham when he comes out in the comic. I actually think Mark Buckingham has a similar style. So
definitely.
I mean, a nice thing about Fables is because he does lots of little one-offs of like, here's, back in the homeland before the Fables came to New York, or really in the early days of them coming to New York, maybe he'll do one little single story. So there's a nice variety of artists who get to show up and, flex for 1 or 2 issues and a big variety of styles as the series progresses.
Yeah, the trade paperback I got from my library has a preview of that Fairest spinoff you were talking about, and it looks like it's a art from Phil Jimenez, who is very much more in the kind of modern, I would say, the image generation of artists. It's not this first arc, like I jokingly said, it's the Vertigo house style, but it's the flat colors and very detailed backgrounds and facial work, but without ever being too concerned with that realism that you get in a lot of modern comics. I think of kind of the hyper realism with the contoured colors on the faces and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. Very, very used very lightly for like maybe like Snow White's makeup. She'll get a little flush on her cheeks, but that's about it. Yeah. Otherwise, it's nice, bold colors, strong inking, and the covers. The covers of this series. Yes. James Jean sticks around for like 80 issues, and every cover is like worth hanging on your wall. Just beautiful.
You talk a little bit about, for a long time in this series, the main draw is getting to explore this setting and the characters. So I was kind of wondering, some of the characters you thought stood out in this volume as being interesting, or maybe some of the ones that get developed a little bit more later, or if there's characters that you feel like fall a little flat, even this little alternate.
Like Pinocchio, I think, gets one scene here.
Yeah, it's a gag.
He's a gag, and he becomes like a real character rather than just like, we're gonna put crude lines in the, mouth of what looks like a 10-year-old boy, right? So yeah, there's some of that. I think actually Bluebeard is one of the ones that gets a really hard focused here, who does shift to the background. But Bigby and Snow White are the main characters of Fables. You know, they're the main characters here. They stay the main characters throughout, more or less. A character who gets very small role here is Flycatcher.
Yeah, I didn't even know what that was a reference to, what fable that was, to be honest.
I actually have no idea.
I've heard all the rest of them I could place, but I didn't know.
Once in a while, there's. Yeah, let me actually see. I have no idea. Based on the Frog Prince.
Okay.
But he becomes like a really great character as time goes on. So you know he does populate it with lots of little. I mean, Beast and Beauty here are smaller characters. You know, the mayor, Prince Charming, right? They're around. Jack gets a lot of spotlight. He's not always one of my favorites. You know, he's kind of, as they say, like a jerk ass throughout this.
Yeah, definitely.
Sometimes it's funny. Sometimes you feel like he likes him more than the audience does. But yes, I think it's pretty undeniable that like Bigby and Snow White have a good rapport here at the beginning that is interesting. I mean, I love the ending of this, of Bigby kind of showing a little softness and like, yeah, I did set a little of this up so you would invite me to the ball, and her being like, oh, don't do that again. And he's like, okay. And she's like, no, I'm serious. Don't ever do that again. Like, it ends with a real like splash of cold water on the idea that like this is a simmering romance, which I appreciate, because I think it just lets that relationship build and build and build, and they're really interesting.
I definitely think that Bigby, especially if his take on Bigby, if Bill Willingham and the artist's take on Bigby didn't work, I don't think that this arc would work at all. And I think it really does. They really do find an interesting character here in that noir detective trope, but with the guy, instead of having the kind of trouble with alcoholism or other violent past, it is the big bad wolf who they make oblique references to. There was some sort of general amnesty, so all of the characters that from Fables that have done violent things, that they can't be held against them anymore.
And you get these natural tensions between the three pigs, right, and Bigby Wolf. Although one of the three pigs keeps like crashing on his couch and being like, "You owe me," which is a good gag. But yeah, right. The general amnesty and these hints at that some of these fables, like these old folk stories, they have very violent pasts,
right?
And that like past has been wiped out and forgiven, like governmentally, at least. Bluebeard, very famous for murdering all his wives, but saying basically like, you can't hold that against me now. It feels like a very simple setup, but I think all the little details feel very rich. It doesn't.
Yes. Yeah.
It feels both comfortable and familiar the way that he interprets these characters, but not obvious. Like, they do still feel like fleshed out characters. They don't just feel like generic interpretations of what would a Snow White be. Very bitter about that she got dealt a bad hand by her Prince Charming ran off, and she's very like cold and bitter about that now. And I mean, also when it comes to Bigby Wolf, there's a reason he's the video game The Wolf Among Us is about him. There's a reason why he is in his own miniseries with Batman. There's a Batman Bigby Wolf crossover miniseries, right? I think he really like nails it with this character and finds something very fun and appealing.
Yeah, and to your point there, with Snow White as an example, I think that the changes that are made from what you might just blanketly assume their personas would be from the folk tales, or if there's a Disney adaptation of these characters, the changes that he makes feel very based in the concept, right? Of okay, Snow White, it's happily ever after when the movie wraps, but 500 years later with their immortal lives, is it still going to be a happily ever after? And I think it really does a good job of kind of evolving those characters from their more simple personas that you would find in the folktale and the fables. And to your point about the details, I again just praising Willingham's tightness in the writing here. The reveal in the final end of the mystery, it's one of those ones that is a very well done and set up. It literally has the flashbacks to individual panels from issue 1, where you can kind of see, oh, here's the clue that at the moment you thought was just set dressing. Maybe it's just showing you the scene, but explains specifically why this close up of, for example, a toaster in the Red Rose's apartment is actually a very vital clue in unraveling his whole mystery. It really does a good job integrating the art to show you visually these clues. And like, I haven't played the Wolf Among Us video game, but I could see how you get this would work very well in a video game, having these objects you can interact with that kind of build to a bigger solution to the mystery.
And I would I'd recommend Wolf Among Us, but I'd recommend it to people who are already, have already read Fables, because it's very, it's not just fan service, it's a nice story. The Wolf Among Us game is a murder mystery as well, but, it is full of stuff where you're going to be like, oh, I know that, and I recognize this, little bit of world building and all this stuff. So it is fun, for fans. So it goes for 150 issues. It has a very natural stopping point at issue 75, halfway through the series. And it will have a point where a lot of readers, including myself at the time, because I read this trade by trade as it was coming out, went, oh, it's still going to go. Okay. And then it kind of feels less essential for a bit. And then it finds its footing again and has some really cool stuff. And I feel like the back half is never quite as strong as the first half. But if you're a fan, there's a lot of really good stuff in that second half. And there's some clumsy stuff. You could feel maybe it jumps the shark, but I think you would still miss out on a lot of really good stories and villains and character arcs and a nice conclusion. I have not read the final 12 issues that he did just a couple of years ago. They came after the fact. I have no idea what they're about, so I can't really speak to those. But I think it's a really rich journey because, like I said, he's very deft at weaving in larger world building out this universe of characters and magical items and the rules at which how things work through story and character. You never really feel like you're just getting an info dump for the sake of an info dump. For me, it always felt very enriching of my experience when he would talk about you come across a magical sword and then it feels very integral to the world, and when it comes back up again,
right.
He's very good at laying groundwork for future payoff for stuff, both character-wise and world building. So, we get little hints at why the Fables were driven out of their lands and stuff here. It's not it's the background to everything, but it is not the immediate peril. And it, is just something he lets slowly simmer in the background while he deals with the more immediate stories about their lives. I would recommend reading the whole thing. You've got other spin-offs, most of which are collected within the series. If you wanted to do the full read, you'd have to find out where Fairest is located, where Cinderella gets woven in, where Jack of Fables, maybe you could give it a shot. Maybe it would work better for you than it ever did for me. I think it's pretty inessential. So a big recommendation from me, especially if you like this first arc. If this first arc does it, the second arc's, I think, just as good. I think the second arc's a really fun continuation of this. And if you get to 75 and you feel like you are happy where it is, you can leave it there. But I would say there's a lot of storylines that I think of really fondly that happen after issue 100.
I say that is pretty amazing that you can have a series with issues that are still feel of worth and of value after issue 100. It's you see that more often, I guess, in long running manga, but it's hard for me to think of a Western comic that doesn't feel like at a certain point the stories don't mean as much, or it loses it lose momentum. I know people have felt that way with some of the longer running series like Saga or with Monstrous, but so I think that is very impressive.
What do you think the perfect number for a comic run is? Because I have a number where I'm like, every perfect comic goes this number of issues, but
I think it's a similar number to where you're thinking, because I think through a lot of these the Vertigo series or the Image series that concluded, because so many of those Image series from the 2010s boom didn't conclude, or still, I guess, being made. But I do think that maybe around 50 to 60 issues seems about right. That's 10.
60 is my number.
Yeah.
I think I've read enough perfect with very little fluff series that ran for exactly 6 years. Like Preacher and Chew, off the top of my head, both ran for 60 issues, and they feel big and comprehensive and complete.
I don't know if you've seen this, but DC Comics is bringing back their Vertigo imprint pretty soon. In the next few months, there's going to be the first issues coming out, and they're trying to pitch it like these series could go just as long. I mean, not as long as Fables, but that they could be that kind of 60 issues or more in length. And that's increasingly rare in like I said, in Western comics to have these long-running series. Do you think we've lost something that would enable these kind of series to go this long, or why we don't see that as often now?
I can't diagnose it, financially for these companies, but I do think not letting your series go long enough that they can get a real nice word of mouth going, is detrimental to the. I mean, how many creator-owned series get more than 12, 24 issues now?
Yeah.
Right. Even really good ones, that just don't find their audience immediately, and I feel like you need to. They need to give them a little time, be a little choosier with who they, give the series to, and invest in them once they greenlight them. Because, like I said, I mean, I think it feels bold that this comic has such little to do with its larger story in this first arc and in the second arc, and I think in the third arc. You're not going to be like, oh, I know exactly where this is going long term. It's not clear. They're not on the larger quest right away, and I think that actually it feels very bold now to have something that feels like so leisurely. I'm gonna give you the big stuff when I feel like it. And
right, I'm reminded of the. I'm reminded of the Invincible. I don't know if this is a true story or not, but it's a story that Robert Kirkman tells that he was going to have the big, the big initial twist. I guess I can avoid spoiling it, but the one. If you've read the series or seen the TV show, he was going to save that for issue 20 or more, and the people at Image told him, your series won't get that many issues. You need to do the twist now, and that's why it happened so quick. Well, yes, in that example, but it is interesting, that I think that there is more of that pressure to, if this is the interesting part of your story, then do it now.
If this is
Don't
what
wait.
sets it apart from. I mean, because that is really the mission statement, that like the initial planting of the flag in Invincible is being like, this is not Spider-Man. This is not Batman, right? Like, we're doing something a little different here. It does pull the series into something very unique that the first, dozen issues don't necessarily.
But I'd say with Fables, it's interesting enough already. It doesn't need that ongoing week-to-week, month-to-month coming by to find out the next step in this journey, or you have like the characters that are interesting and engaging, and the writing that's good. That's a pull enough on its own. You don't need to get to that premise.
Yeah, it doesn't need to hit some big subversion or some big twist, because you're just invested in the characters in this world, and the premise is good enough, which is just kind of simmering in the background confidently. We will never see Fables again, though. Even with Vertigo relaunching, Willingham, interestingly to me, did the Michael Scott I Declare Bankruptcy, but with I Declare Fables in the public domain in 2023. And he publicly said, because he was having issues with DC about publishing rights and media rights and stuff, and he was like, well, this is creator owned. I declare that it's public domain, and DC is like, no, we own it, and we're gonna keep our IP. And it feels like that was the end of it. I don't really know where legally it stands, but there's bad blood between Willingham and DC.
Well, you heard it here, folks. It's legal to pirate Fables. Go out and support. Print as many copies on your own printers and sell them for your own money.
Yeah. I don't know the details of it, but I assume if DC did not treat him well, that's certainly what he says. But I tend to side with the creators on these things, and
many such cases, for sure.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
but
in comics.
It was definitely an interesting move to be like, I'm giving away my comic. Anyone can use it, and anyone can do anything with this IP. I don't know if he decided to take that to any more like legal steps with that. I think it means we'll never see any more Fables, and it's fine. 162 issues. I certainly can't imagine that there's many more stories to tell with these characters.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like the kind of story that would work well without Willingham. Doesn't seem like DC could start mining those stories. Kind of the way that they tried to integrate Sandman into the broader DC universe a couple times, and it never really takes. I couldn't see Fables, but it would feel maybe watered down without Willingham's input, I think.
So it's not a story. It's not a forever universe. Things happen. Characters die. Characters change a lot. Like for having a bunch of immortal characters, it's not constantly resetting itself back to a place where you could just keep telling the same detective stories with Bigby Wolf over and over again.
Right.
Things change a lot. Right. It would be like saying we could just pick up Watchmen and go, well, okay, I guess DC has decided they can do that. It ends, right? It ends and it evolves. It's not like the big two comics that generally don't want to push their characters into strongly static positions.
Well, I think that's most of what I have to say. Is there anything else that you want to say before you?
I'm good, thank you.
All right.
This was great. Tons of fun to talk about this comic.
I agree. I'm glad that I got to do it with you. Do you want to just pitch My Marvelous Year extra issues one last time?
My Marvelous Year. People know, if you want to read Marvel comics, come check out My Marvelous Year. It helps you like onboard into Marvel comics with a reading list. But extra issues, that's my baby. So extra issues right now, as this is coming out, we're wrapping a series on Osamu Tezuka, the godfather of manga, creator of Astro Boy. We're doing six episodes covering him. We're also doing The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck by Don Rosa, and then we're going to do Calvin and Hobbes. And we've done all kinds of stuff. We do non-fiction comics, we've done superhero subversions, we did Fantagraphics, the publisher, all kinds of interesting stuff. My co-host Charlotte and I try to do comics that make us more well-rounded comics readers and, encourage people. I mean, it's the most rewarding thing about the podcast is finding that, like, we have caused other people to read outside of what they normally would check out and like find things that they love that it's like normally outside of their wheelhouse. So check out extra issues. I'm very proud of that show. Steven's on it.
I would say I'm not on My Marvelous Year, so I definitely would also say extra issues is the better podcast, right?
We'll get you on My Marvelous Year sometime.
Yeah,
pick an episode and just let me know. Well,
maybe once I started actually reading more month-to-month comics, we're getting pretty close. I think you kind of first hit some of those recently with the first comic I ever bought was the FF #1 when Spider-Man joined the team. Sure. Thanks for being here with me, Zach. Keep reading comics.
Keep reading the comics.